As an architecture student, I had a professor that said I didn't have the pedigree or ideas or skill set to sort of work in any sort of important context.
This is the history of Virgil Abloh. Virgil Abloh was born and raised in Rockford, Illinois, a city just outside of Chicago. He loved skateboarding, he loved music, and he loved sports. Growing up, Abloh explored many different interests that interceded with the emerging streetwear culture, and as a kid, he even sent some sneaker designs to Nike, but was told that they don't accept submissions. Growing up in Chicago during Michael Jordan's prime years with the Bulls, in an interview with GQ, Abloh's childhood friend Chris Eaton said that they discovered books like spray can art and bombed the suburbs during middle school, and before long they were experimenting with the art form themselves. Virgil was also interested in graffiti. Virgil witnessed firsthand the dawning of sneaker culture as we know it today. When he wasn't out skating, DJing, or drawing, Virgil was attending Boylan Catholic High School in Rockford, where he played for the men's soccer team. Virgil has said that his parents were supportive of him exploring his passions, but that they always emphasized the importance of pursuing an education. In an interview with Heisnabiety, Abloh said that soccer is the sport he played the most growing up, and that he'd always been fascinated by the sponsored logos on the front of the jerseys. Virgil then went back to school, this time to the Illinois Institute of Technology, where he pursued a master's degree in architecture. If you don't know who Samuel Spritzer is, you've probably still seen some of his work. It was during his time at the Illinois Institute of Technology that Virgil dove headfirst into streetwear culture. Today, his company manages the web presence for the likes of Supreme, Cavempt, and Cause. Technically, Virgil's first brand was something called Fort Home. Virgil says that the first t-shirt he made for Fort Home used Edwardian script. Thanks to Splay and his trips to New York, Virgil was tapped into New York streetwear culture despite still being enrolled in school back in Chicago. Virgil began making frequent trips to New York City for the sole purpose of shopping at local stores like A-Life, and this allowed him to start making connections in the community, because that's the only font his copy of Adobe Illustrator had at the time. And there was also a big X on the back of the shirts. It did, however, catch the attention of one very important person. Virgil sent his designs to be printed at a local t-shirt printing shop called Custom Kings. Virgil had only been working at Custom Kings a short time when Don C. walked in looking for someone to help him design some t-shirts. Is it just me, or does that sound a little bit familiar? He hosted a few pop-up shops for Fort Home, but it never really grew beyond his circle of friends. Employees at the shop were really impressed that he had sent in all of his files in the proper format, and they offered him a job. Don C. saw the potential in the budding designer and set up a meeting between him and his cousin John Monopoly, who was managing Kanye West at the time. Don C. liked Virgil's designs, and the two began working together almost immediately. This turned out to be a major turning point in Virgil's career. The more that they worked together on projects like this, the more Virgil and Kanye began bonding over their shared love for fashion. Fast forward to June of 2016, and Virgil is presenting his Spring-Summer 2017 menswear collection for Off-White at Paris Fashion Week. Even though he wasn't a full-fledged designer yet, Cook took an interest in Virgil after their chance encounter and would keep an eye on his work in the years to come. For this collection, Virgil did a small collaboration with sportswear company Umbro. Fraser Cook happened to be at the show that day, and when he saw the sneakers, he instantly knew that Virgil needed to work with Nike. As part of the collab, some of the runway models were wearing off-white Umbro sneakers. That was the beginning of their collaboration, and almost a year later, the 10 would be released. During the design process, he actually used an X-Acto knife to take the shoes apart before rebuilding them in new ways. Just to add to that, remember that Michael Burke, who was CEO of Fendi during Virgil's internship, was now the CEO and chairman of Louis Vuitton. That's how he redesigned shoes like the Presto, which is literally an inside-out Air Max 90 attached to a Presto sole. Virgil would be working alongside Nicola Jesquier, the creative director of women's wear for Louis Vuitton. However, if you've learned anything from this story, it's that Virgil is always working on something bigger and better. And you're gonna have to excuse me for bragging just a little bit here, but I have receipts in my phone predicting that this was gonna happen months before it became official. It's also fitting that as creative director of menswear, because if you were paying attention, you probably could have seen this coming, whose Autumn-Winter 2012 collection for Balenciaga was one of the main inspirations for Off-White, as we discussed. Kim had already been at Louis Vuitton for 7 years, but he has said on multiple occasions that as a designer, a lot of his inspiration comes from the label's history, and not necessarily from any new references. Michael Burke had been following Virgil's career in fashion, so I have to imagine that between his own personal knowledge and the nod of approval from Kim, Virgil was the obvious choice. So if the future of high fashion is streetwear, who better to take over his role at Louis Vuitton than his longtime friend Virgil? I bring this up because this was 2 months before Kim Jones officially announced that he would be leaving Louis Vuitton, and it was 5 months before Virgil officially announced that he would be taking his place. So to me, the Supreme Louis Vuitton collection was kind of his way of saying that the future of high fashion is streetwear. And hey, maybe Kim was trying to tell us something when he wore the Off-White Air Jordan 1s to his final spring-summer show for Louis Vuitton. A lot of people in the fashion industry didn't know what to expect, so the pressure for his first collection was extremely high, and it was time for him to move to a new label with a different archive from which he can pull new references. And that's exactly what he did by going to Dior. After the announcement that Virgil would be joining Louis Vuitton. Now if you listen to the lecture, you might notice something interesting. Virgil mentions that he was rushing to the lecture from the airport because earlier that same day he was in New York City. This is supposed to mimic how the movie The Wizard of Oz starts off in black and white and then transitions into color when Dorothy arrives in Oz. Ceramic chain-link bag straps, and my personal favorite, the millionaire sunglasses. Some standout pieces included the prism bags, the white and red crocodile totes. I'll also point out that the collection followed a sort of Wizard of Oz theme. To me, this reference was Virgil's way of saying, we're not in Kansas anymore, made obvious by the yellow brick road sweater and an all-over rosebud print featuring a picture of Dorothy. True to the history of Louis Vuitton, the collection also put a spotlight on luggage and accessories. Perhaps the most noticeable design choice was the use of harnesses and holsters, which gave the collection just the right amount of that industrial aesthetic that Virgil is known for. And you might have noticed that the show starts off with a black and white color palette before transitioning into a much brighter, more colorful palette. The collection itself was definitely a new direction for Louis Vuitton, but that's exactly what Virgil was brought in for. Just 9 years earlier, the two of them were at Paris Fashion Week together, not feeling like they belonged, but knowing that they someday would. It's now been about 2 years since Virgil's appointment at Louis Vuitton. That day had finally come, and all of the emotions came out at that moment. The show ended with the teary-eyed Virgil walking onto the runway to roaring applause, where he embraced his longtime friend and collaborator Kanye. And during that time, he has continued putting out critically acclaimed collections. Off-White was arguably the hottest label in fashion, Virgil was a Fashion Week regular, and he was already getting started on other major collaborations like his one with IKEA. Releasing more collaborations, some of which I'm sure we don't even know about yet. Running successful campaigns, managing Off-White, putting together runway shows. Even with everything he's accomplished, Virgil is still really young, and a whole other number of projects. And as a fan of his work, I'm personally really excited to see what the future holds for him. That's the end of the video for today. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. So if you enjoyed it, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe.